In the year 476 AD, the Roman economy didn't slow down. It vanished. An empire that had minted coins for 700 years, built roads across 3 continents, and created the richest middle class in ancient history, gone inside a single generation. Savings became worthless, property sold for nothing. Entire family fortunes built over centuries disappeared in under a decade. But 4 specific assets survived, and the families who owned them didn't just outlast Rome. They became the ruling class of Europe for the next 1,000 years. Here's what you need to understand. The exact pattern that destroyed Roman wealth is already visible in the US economy right now. Most people are missing it. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which 4 assets survived Rome's collapse, and which of them you can still own in 2026. First, the setup. Because what actually killed Rome's economy wasn't the barbarians, it was Rome itself. For over 200 years, Roman emperors quietly debased their currency, reducing the silver content of the denarius from nearly pure under Augustus to less than 5% by the 3rd century. Prices exploded. A measure of wheat that cost 8 denarii in the year 200 cost 120,000 denarii by the year 300. This is not ancient history. This is hyperinflation. And when the state ran out of money, it raised taxes until the middle class collapsed. Small farmers abandoned their land, merchants stopped trading, the cities emptied. By the time the Germanic tribes marched into Rome, the economy was already dead. The invasion wasn't the cause, it was the funeral. And this is where it gets serious, because the United States today runs the same playbook: currency expansion, rising taxation, a hollowing middle class, and a political center increasingly detached from economic reality. The debasement is quieter now. It's called quantitative easing, but the mechanism is identical. Which brings us to the 4 assets that survived it last time. The first asset is gold. Here's what most people get wrong. When Rome's silver currency collapsed, gold didn't just hold value, it became the emergency monetary standard of the Mediterranean world. In 312 AD, Emperor Constantine minted a new coin called the solidus, pure gold, fixed weight, and that single coin held its value for over 700 years after Rome's western half fell. Byzantine merchants, Arab caliphs, European kings, all of them priced their economies in the solidus long after Rome itself was a ruin. The pattern is clear. When paper money fails, gold doesn't appreciate. It simply refuses to disappear. And here's what the data actually shows in 2025. Central banks around the world bought a record 1,037 tons of gold last year, the highest level in modern recorded history. China, Russia, India, Turkey, Poland, all quietly rebuilding their gold reserves, while the American public holds almost none. Central banks are not buying gold because they're optimistic. They're buying it because they've seen this pattern before. What this means for you is simple. Every major currency collapse in recorded history ended with gold repricing upward, not by 20%, but by multiples. The second asset is the one most Americans have completely forgotten: productive farmland. Not real estate, not urban property, working agricultural land. And here's where it gets serious. When Rome's cities emptied and its currency died, urban property became worthless overnight. Roman apartments that had sold for fortunes under Nero were abandoned by the time of Diocletian. But the large productive estates, the latifundia, became the single most valuable asset class in the entire former empire. The families who owned them didn't just survive, they became the aristocracy of Europe. Every noble house in France, Germany, Italy, and Spain traces its wealth back to one decision: holding productive land when the currency died. This is not historical trivia. This is the mechanism of generational wealth. And here's what the data shows today. Bill Gates is the single largest private owner of farmland in the United States. Institutional money, BlackRock, Prudential, pension funds, has been quietly acquiring American farmland for over a decade. Farmland values in the U.S. Midwest have nearly doubled in the last 6 years. The public narrative says real estate is overvalued. The institutional money is saying something very different. And most importantly, they are not buying condos in Manhattan. They are buying soil in Iowa. The pattern is identical to Rome. When the monetary system strains, productive land, land that generates income, land that feeds people, becomes the ultimate hedge. Cities can empty, currencies can die, but the acre that grows wheat keeps generating wheat. This is why every civilization that survived collapse rebuilt its ruling class from agricultural landowners. And it is why most American households, who own nothing but a mortgage, a 401k, and a car, are structurally on the wrong side of this pattern. The third asset surprises most people, because it is not a financial asset at all. It is rare skills. Here's what you need to understand. When Rome collapsed, literacy itself nearly disappeared. Most Roman citizens lost the ability to read within 2 generations. But the individuals who retained specialized skills, blacksmiths, masons, physicians, scribes, were actively protected by warlords, churches, and local rulers. A blacksmith in 7th century Europe was not poor, he was essential. Monasteries preserved literate monks because literate monks were an asset that generated value when gold could not buy bread. And here's the modern pattern. In every major economic crisis of the last 100 years, the Great Depression, the Weimar collapse, the Soviet breakup, the Venezuelan implosion, the people who retained income-generating skills outperformed the people who held only financial assets. Financial assets freeze in a crisis. Skills do not. What this means for you is direct. In an era where artificial intelligence is collapsing the value of generic knowledge work, the specialized trades, applied medical expertise, engineering skills, and hands-on crafts are becoming more valuable, not less. The collapse scenario may or may not arrive, but the skill hedge works in every scenario. This is the one asset on this list that requires no capital to acquire. It only requires time, which is why most people will ignore it. The 4th asset is the dark horse of Rome's collapse: defensible community networks. Here is the pattern most people miss. After Rome fell, isolated wealth got raided. Lone estates were sacked. Individual merchants were robbed on the roads. But networked, fortified communities, walled manors, monasteries, trading guilds, and religious orders survived and thrived. The Catholic Church was not just a religion. It was a continent-wide mutual aid and security network with its own courts, its own economy, and its own protection system. The monasteries of Ireland preserved Western civilization not because they had the most gold, but because they had walls, community, discipline, and networks. The pattern is clear. In a systemic stress event, isolated individuals lose. Networked communities win. And here is what this means in 2026. The erosion of American community, declining trust, collapsed civic institutions, the loneliness epidemic, the hollowing of local economies, is not a cultural problem. It is an economic vulnerability. The families and individuals embedded in strong local networks, real neighbors, real churches, real trade communities, real physical proximity to people they trust, hold an asset that does not appear on any balance sheet. But in every historical collapse, that asset outperformed portfolios. This is the quietest of the 4. It may be the most important. So here is the full pattern. Gold, productive farmland, rare skills, defensible networks. 4 assets that outlasted Rome. 4 assets the American middle class largely does not own. The United States is not Rome. Not yet. But the mechanisms are the same. Currency debasement, rising taxation, a hollowing middle class, declining civic trust, and a political class increasingly detached from economic reality. The pattern that destroyed Roman wealth does not require an apocalypse. It only requires time. The question is not whether these assets will reprice upward. The question is whether you own any of them before they do. Most people will watch this video, agree with it, and do nothing. The ones who act are the ones who show up on the right side of every historical transition. That is the pattern. That is the data. And now, poquieta, you know what most people are missing.